Coming up on the program, at least 40 countries agree to phase out coal by the 2030s. A study looks at the health impact of pollution from South Africa's sprawling coal industry. Plus, Germany considering more measures to curb COVID-19 cases. Well, welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. We continue our coverage on the COP26 meetings taking place in Glasgow, Scotland. And today, the focus is on coal, something countries such as Indonesia, Poland, Vietnam, and other nations pledged to phase out by the 2030s. The countries pledged not only to phase out use of coal, but to stop building plants. But the deal to end the domestic use of the most polluting fossil fuel leaves out some of the world's biggest coal-dependent nations, such as Australia, China, and India. COP26 President Alok Sharma still insists coal financing is being choked off.
It is uneconomic. The G20 will end its financing for international coal this year. Investors are also bailing out, and today, amongst other institutions, NatWest, HSBC, Fidelity International, and Lloyds Banking Group are joining the Powering Past Coal Alliance. And in the face of this new reality, today countries including South Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam, Poland, and Ukraine are committing to phase out coal power. Now, we know that this transition must be just, and new tools for delivering the transition are emerging. Development banks, governments, philanthropies, and the private sector are coming behind it, helping countries across the world. We have seen over the last day or so announcements of around $18 billion in new support so far this COP for the transition from coal to clean power.
Of course, the federal politics is quite challenging in Australia. Every state in Australia is in the race to zero. They've all committed to net zero by 2050. And industry is increasingly transitioning there. There's tens of billions of dollars going into renewables. I mean, we talk about Australia being the country that's lucky twice, right? They had lots of fossil fuel reserves and minerals naturally. They also have a lot of sun and land, which is just what you need. So Australia is going to become a powerhouse in renewables.
Before the deal this morning, clean and affordable energy for the entire world was on the lips of attendees arriving for day 5 of COP26. A main aim of the talks is to secure national promises to cut greenhouse gas emissions, mostly from coal, oil and gas, that are sufficient to keep the rise in the average global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Divisions remain between wealthy nations pushing for a swift end to the dirty fuels of the Industrial Revolution and poorer developing countries that rely on cheap, accessible coal and other fossil fuels to grow.
Energy access and energy development has to be part of the climate agenda. You can't do something for one half of the world and then you have 1 billion people living in energy poverty. It just doesn't work. So what we're trying to infuse and what we're doing in the conversation is to say there's still 759 million people who don't have access to electricity and 2.6 billion people that don't have access to clean cooking. How do we make sure they get access in a clean, sustainable way instead of coming back to transition again in another 10, 20 years? The other thing is that people are asking for countries to electrify the entire economies, right? But there's not kind of a clean energy offer on the other side of the table, and then key technical assistance to get them there. So I believe that if countries are showing pathways, that this is the most sustainable way to go, and these are the different types of investment that can happen. So you get to true economic growth. This isn't just like charity. It's getting people out of poverty, but creating a lot of wealth through jobs, healthier people, and from this pandemic, we've already.
The World Meteorological Organization says carbon emissions have rebounded to near pre-pandemic levels, with coal and natural gas emissions surging in the power and industry sectors even as transportation emissions remain low. And last year, carbon emissions fell by a record 1.9 billion tons as countries locked down and economies ground to a halt. The new report produced by the Global Carbon Project forecasts emissions to rise by 4.9% this year.
Which is the parallel with the global financial crisis that, the last big crisis we've had in 2008, 2009. Transport and oil emissions are down still now. In the road transport, there's a lot of discussion.
So last year we saw about 5.6% drop in the emissions because of the COVID lockdowns, and since then we have been seeing recovery of the emissions, and we are more or less back to 2019 emission levels. And WMO has just measured that the carbon dioxide concentration still continues to grow, and even during the lockdown year last year we saw 2.5 ppm increase of carbon dioxide, and that was of course not a positive surprise for us. And actually we have seen also positive development. 32 countries have been able to reduce their emissions during the past 15 years, and for example UK has been number 2, reducing its emissions by 37%.
Our environment correspondent Ayola Kasim is in Glasgow. Ayola, today attention turned to carbon emissions with a pledge to phase out coal by the 2030s. Which of the big emitters join in this pledge, and how feasible do you think this will be?
Well, nice seeing you, Amara. I wouldn't say any of the big emitters actually joined it, but we have Indonesia, we have Vietnam, Poland, South Korea, Egypt, Spain, Singapore, Chile, and Ukraine joining, the commitment. It's actually called they actually call it the Global Call to Clean Power Transition. They had a statement. This new country also joined the Just Transition Declaration. All of them signed this. So we didn't really see all the big names, really. We just heard that China, for instance, China is going to try and say, commit to end the coal financing by the end of 2022. So nothing really from the big emitters today, nothing.
And then how feasible do you think it will be to phase out coal by the 2030s? Since, of course, you say none of the big names are in this pledge.
Yes, if you see what, like here, we didn't see any of the big emitters, aside from the United States. And the United States is pushing methane, is not pushing the main fossil fuel. So from what we're seeing here, UK is giving themselves a pat on the back, saying that people are signing on to phase out coal, not to finance it from next year. But if you listen to what our president said, the President Muhammadu Buhari, saying 2060 for Nigeria, and things like that, many of them are just looking for an easy way out for themselves, and they're touting the word just transition, such that we don't want to push people into poverty. So we will have to do it such a way that everybody is carried along, no one is left behind. But then in looking at this, even when you're talking about the just transition and you don't want to leave people behind, the people suffering this is actually those people that are poor, they can't really afford, they're the ones that suffer the most the impact of climate change. So we have to put our money where our mouth is. We have to do the right thing at the right time. That's what activists are saying at this moment, that you can't just say that there will be a just transition without you committing to ending it by 2030. So there's no really commitment for that 2030. And then as the negotiation is starting now, we're beginning to see all these things playing out in body language, in some of the conversation going on during the negotiation. So 2030 may not be feasible.
Wow. And the pollution from coal production is quite dire. In a moment, we'll see what's going on in South Africa. But what simpler, cheaper measures can countries on this side of the world consider instead of coal?
Well, they're talking about biofuel. They're talking about, we can still do gas. Gas is not cheap even now in the country. And Damilola, she spoke today, she's appealing to the developed country during the Energy Day celebration that they should provide opportunities for countries, developing countries like Nigeria, the finances that we need to transition such that people are not left behind. Because as it is now, and with the situation back home, people can't even afford to buy gas. Many people are being left to, and then the gains, the little gain we had over the past few years, we are now being eroded. So people are now, they are appealing that the finance should come. No, all these things comes back to the money. We want to see the money such that we can have, we don't fall back to using charcoal or degrading the forest and all that. So that's what is expected. We just need the money to come out now so that we can help us transition and leave no one behind in the race towards 1.5 degrees centigrade.
Ayala, I know you have a lot still to do today, and those meetings are continuing, so I'm going to let you go so you can go and focus on more work. We'll check in with you later. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Nice seeing you.
Well, in 2019, scientists working for South Africa's government completed a study on the health impacts of pollution from the country's sprawling coal industry. So far, it's not seen the light of day. The study shows more than 5,000 South Africans die annually in the country's coal belt because the government has failed to enforce its own air quality standards.
For local Malaleni mother, Mbali Matabule, the impact of coal has been severely traumatic for her and her daughter, Princess. In May 2018, as she approached her 4th birthday, Princess started struggling to breathe. Matabule rushed her to the hospital, where a doctor put a mask on Princess's face attached to a nebulizer. Matabule was shocked to find out that Princess had asthma. 3 years later, Matabule lives in constant fear that her daughter would not survive the disease.
They don't help us in any way as a community. Our houses are cracked because of the blasting. The blast can be 4 to 5 times a day, and since we are so close to the mine, the dust comes to us in our homes. I get very concerned because I feel like my child won't live for a long time. It means anytime she could die because of her situation.
A doctor who practices in the coal mine town says that respiratory diseases are very common amongst adults and children because of the pollution they're exposed to on a daily basis.
Most of the doctors around, we have sort of become experts in treating allergic rhinitis and asthma simply because there's so much of it. And I also mentioned the fact that one could say is environmental.
Smog released from burning coal is laced with chemicals like sulfur and nitrogen oxides, mercury and lead, and radioactive elements like uranium and thorium.
We can't live comfortably because of the dust and coal that smells from the mine dump. We are not the ones burning coal, but we are the ones suffering from the smoke.
A 2019 Council for Scientific and Industrial Research study concluded that 5,125 lives could be saved every year in the coal belt by enforcing national air quality standards on soot, otherwise known as particulate matter. According to the non-profit Global Carbon Atlas, South Africa is the world's 12th largest greenhouse gas emitter. This water-stressed country also stands to be one of the big losers from climate change.
When we come back after the break on The World Today, a look at other stories here on the continent as well as the world. Plus, back to the climate as a demoted police chief turns singer to save the Amazon forest. Stay with us. Welcome back. Germany has recorded almost 34,000 daily COVID-19 cases in the past 24 hours, a country's highest number so far. A country is yet to vaccinate at least 16 million more people. As comes as the World Health Organization warns of a possible 500,000 more deaths in Europe by next February. Here's a global update.
Global update begins in Germany, where COVID-19 hotspots are getting tough on unvaccinated people as the number of cases rises. Local county commissioner for the town of Modeldorf says it's either people get vaccinated, which is how people can protect themselves against the virus and to protect people around them, or people could reduce their contact with those who have not been vaccinated. He admitted that the region never really managed to lower the case number as much as other counties and regions because of the town's vicinity to the Austrian border and the return of a lot of Eastern Europeans. Over in Ukraine, several hundred people blocked traffic in the center of the capital, Kyiv, in a protest against coronavirus restrictions and compulsory vaccinations, which the government introduced to curb new infections. Ukraine has registered record high rates of new cases and deaths from the coronavirus in recent weeks, and its total number of infections almost reaching 3 million, with 69,447 deaths. Vaccines have become compulsory for some state workers, and in red zones, including Kyiv, only vaccinated people or those with negative COVID-19 test results are allowed into restaurants, gyms, and on public transport. China's top epidemiologist has called for closer international vaccine cooperation against the coronavirus pandemic and criticized some countries for politicizing vaccines to hinder global anti-pandemic efforts. The director of the National Clinical Research Center for Respiratory Disease made the comment in an interview in China. He said the international community should enter into such cooperation as it does in addressing other pressing challenges. Finally, leader of a remote community in Peru's Amazon rainforest says he first heard about the global pandemic when health workers arrived by boat to his isolated village with vaccines last month. Mangual is the village highest up the river. Residents have no electricity in their wooden stilt houses, living from hunting and fishing. Connection with the outside world is minimal, and the local language developed over centuries of isolation. Many people in the community complain they really need better continuous healthcare services.
The human papillomavirus or HPV vaccine is cutting cases of cervical cancer by nearly 90%, the first real-world data shows. Cancer Research UK described the findings as historic and said it showed the vaccine was saving lives. Nearly all cervical cancers are caused by viruses, and the hope is vaccination could almost eliminate the disease. The researchers said the success meant those who were vaccinated may need far fewer cervical smear tests also. Cervical cancer is the fourth most common cancer in women around the world, killing more than 300,000 each year. French European Affairs Minister Clément Beaune and British Brexit Minister David Frost have met in Paris today in what Beaune says is an effort to relaunch dialogue after weeks of rising tension over fishing rights. The dispute erupted in September after Paris accused London of failing to allocate enough licenses to French boats in the wake of Britain's exit from the European Union, while London says it was respecting the deal. Talks ended after about 2 hours. Both sides did not immediately give details of what they discussed. Beaune shook hands with Frost on the front steps of the ministry, with both men smiling and chatting in front of TV cameras at the end of the discussions. And on Monday, French President Emmanuel Macron postponed trade sanctions he planned against Britain over the licensing dispute so that both sides could work on new proposals. Spanish police have broken up a gang that trafficked hundreds of migrants across the Balkans into the European Union, concealed in trucks in inhumane conditions. Head of the illegal immigration unit in the Spanish National Police Force, Francisco Davila Gutierrez, says the investigation focused on the activities of a Spanish organization dedicated to smuggling Pakistani nationals into the Schengen area. Police images showed how 77 people, including 4 children, were crammed into a squalid cargo compartment of a small truck intercepted at the border between Bosnia and Croatia. The months-long investigation involved agencies in 7 countries. A group's leader was arrested in Romania and transferred to Spain. Further 15 people were arrested as a result of the operation, 12 of them in Spain. Chinese President Xi Jinping has pledged China's commitment to steadfastly upholding true multilateralism and remain resolute in expanding high-level opening up, sharing development opportunities with the world, and making economic globalization more open, inclusive, balanced, and beneficial for all. Addressing the opening ceremony of the 4th China International Import Expo via video link, President Xi pointed out that the opening up measures unveiled at the 3rd China International Import Expo have been basically implemented. He stressed the world must grasp the trend of economic globalization, support countries in opening up wider, oppose unilateralism and protectionism, and work for a better future for mankind. Iranians are marking the 42nd anniversary of the U.S. expulsion from Tehran, demonstrating outside the former U.S. Embassy where American diplomats were taken hostage in 1979. On November 4th, 1979, a group of militarized Iranian students took over the U.S. Embassy in the capital, taking 52 U.S. diplomats and citizens hostage for almost 2 years. To mark the day this year, Iranians burned U.S. flags outside the former embassy, now known as the Aban 13th Den of Espionage Museum, and held signs with anti-U.S. slogans. Yesterday, the Pentagon rejected claims by Iran's Revolutionary Guard that they thwarted an attempt by the United States to detain a tanker carrying the Islamic Republic's oil in the Sea of Oman. American officials say that in reality, Iranian forces had seized a Vietnamese-flagged oil tanker last month, and U.S. naval forces were just monitoring the situation. An Indian fashion designer is using discarded pieces of cloth to piece together fashionable wear for men and women as a sustainable alternative to high fashion. New Delhi-based Kriti Tula's fashion label Doodlage collects fabric waste from factories discarded for minor defects and pieces them together to create flowing dresses and saris, selling them for around $100 a piece. The United Nations Environment Programme said in 2019 that roughly $2.4 trillion global fashion industry accounts for 8 to 10% of the world's carbon emissions, more than all international flights and maritime shipping combined.
When you start processing the fabric, all the pesticides, the chemicals that are used in production of this fabric goes into our waterways, it goes into our ground water. If you look at dyeing processes, extreme amount of chemicals that go back into our waterways, and all of this obviously ends our food chain. If you keep consuming polyester, you wash it at a consumer end, there are microfibers that are always releasing into waterways. So all of this ends up back into our food chain. So everything that we wear eventually, impacts everything that we eat and we consume and we breathe.
You can't buy the rain, you can't buy the breeze, you need to refrain. Pronto. Só alguma coisinha.
Don't know if they would a Tony for this one, but Alexander Sarieva, a police chief in Brazil's Amazon region for a decade, was discharged in January, a day after he led the country's largest seizure of illegal lumber that he says is stripping the world's largest rainforest. Dispatched to a backwater job by President Jair Bolsonaro's government, Sarieva has turned to song to urge rich countries to stop buying illegally harvested Amazon hardwood. In a duet with singer known as Esther, he levels his charges in SOS Amazon with lyrics by Cristina Sarieva. It was released on social media as nations gather at the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow. The police chief is calling now for tougher European Union regulations on the entry of illegal timber and better auditing. He estimates that 90% of export papers are forged to hide their origin.
Imensidão, guarda as lendas, prendas, dores, guarda o tempo, guarda. E o resultado acho que foi legal. Mas o importante é que a música é como uma garrafa.
Anything to save the planet, right? Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.